Well, the Zimmerman case.
Alright, so here's the main thing for me. Okay, so look, now this is George Zimmerman says Trayvon came up and hit him up here. See these dots down here? That's where the dead body ended up. How do you go to the ground here? Now, if George Zimmerman was telling a story of, well, he hit me and punched me in the nose. I fell down, but I happened to throw him off and I ran away into the dark. Why doesn't he tell that story? That's a long way away. That's not a, I went down and stumbled, right? You'll see later on in the parts of the video that I clip, they show them struggling, not even where the dead body was, to give him another 10 feet, and they're still 30 feet from the tee where he said he was standing on the pavement, minding his own business on the path, right, between the roads. Not in the dog walk, not pursuing Trayvon. So the prosecution should have focused on that more, I think, but I'm sure it'll come up. But I think they had a lot of opportunities to focus on that and show that George Zimmerman's club does not. Okay, that's my main problem, right? Now, I got bored of looking through all these tapes to find the part where they show that how he got down there is an arrow that moves somehow 40 feet. They had the guy testify that this was, he couldn't find anything that controverted this version of events. But there's one where Zimmerman says that Trayvon jumped out from a bush. Why didn't they show that?
So, yeah, rebuttal witnesses included. It's going to go into closing arguments tomorrow afternoon. Well, tomorrow morning, my time. The prosecution, the evidence is out there. The jury gets to look over, the evidence themselves. The inferences have been put out there by the prosecution, but that's not really quite enough. I mean, I personally think that there should be enough for second-degree murder in the evidence. But I'm not really so keen that the jury should be entirely on their own to deduce that or feel like that, that's their responsibility. I think, for example, I've been watching the mainstream coverers of this. CNN has been doing program after program. Frank Taffy is on headline news for like 8 hours a day. And they've been saying a lot of things like, hey, look, there's a witness that says George Zimmerman was well-intentioned. He helped her with her robbery, and he wasn't badly intentioned towards Trayvon Martin. He was just uptight because the neighborhood had been getting robbed. And that's common sense that, you give him a break, that's why he was uptight. Legally, that's the ill will. He had a grudge against Trayvon Martin that had nothing to do actually with Trayvon Martin. Nothing. Trayvon Martin was not a part of that. He wasn't there when the black youth his age around about got arrested for robbing a house. He wasn't that dude. But frankly, we have a legal system where part of it is roll of the dice. Who is the prosecutor? What gambit do they choose? What strategy do they pursue? And this hasn't turned out so well. On the other hand, I think that, maybe I don't think it comes down to this. I think that Florida is forever surprising. But it seems to me like they'll give instructions on the lesser charges. Now, I think that George had what I would consider ill will and malice going into it, but I don't think the prosecution has really demonstrated that to the level that they should. There is a reasonable doubt left by the way they put the argument. Maybe the closing will close that. But regardless, what they have done, and maybe this is what they were doing, prosecutors are a little bit lazy and or conservative. Perhaps they're just looking for justice and don't want to overplay their hands. That part's not likely. But anyway, and I think they've left the manslaughter charges wide open, assuming those are in the instructions, which I think is pretty safe to assume. And when you get back to manslaughter, that starts to be the more objective thing. It's like, well, were you really about to die? And those kinds of questions. And then because of Jeb Bush, of course, they have these laws where the punishment for manslaughter, it's not life, but it can be. Like if you have bad behavior in jail, it could be life. And it starts off at like 20 plus years. So because Trayvon was a minor, and because it was a gun that was used, there's like a third strike you're out kind of attitude that was put in, and Jeb Bush did it. And it's funny because it's conservatives. Well, it's still a kid with a gun, obviously there's something wrong. Now they're like, what? We hate those draconian laws. But be that as it may. Now, I still hope it is murder too. I think there's room in there because there's such flexibility in what the jury decides. But, I think there's a lot of things the prosecution should have pointed out. They should have had a lot more diagrams showing that Zimmerman was 40 feet away from where he had to be when he supposedly says he went down. They shouldn't have just put up his statements. They should have pointed out the inconsistencies more. I actually think they did a decent job from my point of view. Like, I got the gist of why they showed the 911 calls, because originally I thought, why bother to do that? And then I realized, oh yeah, the last 5 months of his calls were all about, there's going to be another African-American youth. That's who we caught. Now that, and that shows a kind of ill will, which is, the difficult part of their story in terms of the precedent of the law, and really how liberal that can be, what counts as ill will. Basically, our law allows for this crime of passion. It was only the last minute where I realized I was going to kill him. I'd never realized until he was dead. Those kinds of things have weight. And again, in the manslaughter area, not so much. So I do think that even though the prosecution hasn't done that great of a job, because we know how he died, who was following who, and how it all happened in the provocation, I think he should still get manslaughter. I think all the conservatives thinking that there'll be no civil suits are wrong, and I think the civil suit has a big chance of succeeding, assuming there is one. But yeah, they just haven't done. The thing is, there's an emotion with murder 1 and 2. You're supposed to read the mind of the killer and decide what they were thinking when they did it, and that requires a narrative. I think we should have totally material means for deciding. It's like, did you take a risk? Murder would be degrees of negligence, and the issue of, well, you weren't just negligent, you wanted to kill them, is indistinguishable from a kind of negligence that ensured the other person's death. And you can't just say, oh, but at that moment I thought I was in danger. That's a silly principle, and you can't really say, well, did you know that putting someone underwater for 3 minutes would kill them? Possibly. No, I thought it was like 5 seconds, who knew? Something shouldn't really depend on the person that did the killing, in my view. But like I say, I think we have the trial. There's this fact that the jury really is supposed to limit themselves to what was said. They don't have to limit themselves to what was argued, but they're supposed to take some, instruction from that. And, justice-wise, I'm fine with manslaughter because I don't think I can know what he really intended, and I think he didn't intend to get some kid like Trayvon, maybe being a little rough around the edges, like Zimmerman was when he was a teenager. He attacked a cop when he was a teenager and didn't get killed for it. But he thought he was, someone that wasn't even supposed to be in that neighborhood, had no home in that neighborhood. That's what Zimmerman thought, and he was wrong. So it was an accident. It's just that, but that kind of accident, you're not supposed to let that happen. Someone ended up dead. If you had shot and hit him in the shoulder, then you'd be getting more of a slap on the wrist, in my system. But just to be clear, I do think it's murder, too, because I do think there was an ill intent. I think that he thought he was following a fucking asshole punk that always would get away, and that enabled him. And all of this testimony about what a good citizen George was and his intentions were good, it's like, yeah, he's being a good citizen to you because you fill a role in his head of a good citizen that should be protected, and to someone else, that person fills the villain role, and in his little mind, it's the same thing with with him trying to go to a fighting gym and the fighting instructor saying, yeah, but he was a wimp. Yeah, a wimp that wanted to be Mr. Tough Guy and is going to a Mr. Tough Guy gym. I thought it was interesting that gym is advertising a here the Zimmerman workout kind of thing when they say he was worthless. So a guy that's worthless fighting should not go into a dark alley to follow a thug. Because then when it turns out it's just a scared kid that tries to push him back and he falls down, he shoots the kid. So we'll see though. It's gone nice and quick. I wonder how that'll play an appeal.